and we are close to releasing the new app. We're hoping to get it out. We've already got it out for beta testing. We're hoping to get it released in October. So the sort of things you can expect now, we've got a much better functional parity between what volunteers can see and use on the mobile apps compared to what they can see and use on the dashboard in the regular desktop version. We still develop first for the desktop. It's the peculiarity of our particular demographic, I think, with volunteers, that we still find more people interact with not a mobile device. Normally, you'd expect people interacting these days sort of 70% with a mobile device, but ours is lower. So we're still targeting the desktop apps for the new features. So there will always be some sort of lag, but right now the feature parity is a lot better. We've also gained feature parity between iOS and Android, so they're not developed on separate streams anymore. So any changes to anything on the iOS or Android versions are mirrored across, so people won't have a different experience depending on what phone they're using. It supports many more opportunity types, includes expenses, translation ready, and white label organization specific stuff, which I'm going to go through now. So we've already talked a bit about the functional parity. You can see here, this is a screenshot of the dashboard options that are available when they're within the app, and you can see how many more things are covered there than the current version of the native apps. So we've got the messaging inbox, roles, notification string, all that sort of stuff that you'd expect. It's pretty much 100% parity between the desktop and the mobile for this next version. We'll go through that again and talk about that. Currently, the apps are different. They look a bit different. They perform a bit differently. So moving forward, they'll look identical, and they'll also behave identically as well and have access to the same opportunity data, etc. So one of the big things for increasing the feature parity is the types of opportunities that are now supported on the app. As our app has languished in development hell, but we've forged ahead creating new features for the desktop version, there's some opportunities that simply weren't appearing on the mobile app because they weren't supported. So things like where they required a role, for instance. So all that stuff is put in now. There aren't any opportunities that you can create currently that aren't supported on the mobile app. That includes role opportunities, self-managed opportunities, opportunities that require an application, require references, any sort of pre-opportunity information screens. All that is included. So all the opportunities will be available in the new app, or all types of opportunities will be available in the new app. As part of that is expenses. We don't have, not many of our customers use expenses, but for those that do, again, within the new app, they can submit an expense, they can put in the value of the expense, they can upload a documentation to support that expense, and that'll appear instantly on your admin dashboards. We've also built the new app to be translation ready. So most of the, all of the important text within the application is abstracted away into a JSON language file, which looks a little bit like this one, where we can then quite easily insert new languages and create new languages to support those people in Wales, for instance, that are using a secondary language and want to that to be reflected in the app. This is quite a big thing for everyone, really, especially some of the larger customers. So the new app has been designed to be able to be white labeled. So what this means is that you'll be able to create a version of the application which will carry your name and your branding and will appear in the App Store under your name as part of this whole process. That white label version will also support registration, which we can't support on the app that's cross-customer because we don't know which customer they belong to at that point when they come to register, which is why it doesn't support registration. But on the white label ones, we'll know which organization that application is for, and so we'll be able to support registration straight into the app. And you can see that that's what that screen will look like there. You can start the registration process there. There will be a cost to that. We're not sure what that will be yet, but it won't be very high. We're talking about the hundreds of pounds rather than thousands of pounds. We don't know exactly how much work is involved and how long it's going to take yet, because we've not done it on a live system. We've only done it when we've been practicing. So as we get better and faster, it'll probably take less time. So that's a massive thing. And as I say, that will appear in the App Store separately. So it won't be under TeamKinetic. It won't be associated with TeamKinetic at all. It'll be in there independently on the App Store under whatever your organization name is. So that's a question everyone asks me every week. As I said, at the minute, we are in beta testing. So some people have got hold of the app already and are giving it a whirl on their phone now. That always brings up lots of issues and small bugs that we didn't catch the first time around. So there will have to be a few weeks of fine-tuning and fixing those bugs and working out which ones we can fix, which ones we can't. And that will dictate to some extent if we have to delay the launch. But I expect this to be coming out in October. We'll be releasing the general version first. And then when we've had a bit more practice at the actual live version and creating white label versions for people, then we will be releasing the white label version after that. It will take a week or two to set up the white label versions, and it has to go through the app stores again for approval as an independent and separate app. And we cannot control how long that takes, although it's generally a few days to a week. So once we're going in October and say before the end of this year, then we'll release the white label ones. You're probably looking at about 2 to 3 weeks from the time of requesting a white label version to it being ready in the app stores. So if there's any questions about that section, about the app. Yeah, as far as languages go, we can support any language. The actual interface on the app could be in multiple, it could be in any language, but at the same time, so people could choose Spanish or Italian, just like with Google Translate, those sorts of things. But in terms of the more inbuilt, baked-in language support, where people can enter alternative languages to describe the dynamic text, like an opportunity description, categories, those sorts of things, the application can only support one language at a time for that. So you have your main language, which is English, then your preferred language, which may be Welsh or Gaelic or French, whatever that is. And that then becomes baked into the product, and we can produce that dynamic text in that preferred language. But your general sort of user interface stuff, the non-dynamic, we can support any number of languages for that. I don't think there's anything else. Nope, no more questions about that bit. So the next stuff I want to talk about was some of the functionality that's fairly new that we've noticed that has either slipped under the radar, people haven't been using it that much, or it gets just hidden away, that sort of stuff. So this is stuff that's available already. So the things we're going to talk about are the waiting lists, some of the new filters and bulk actions, which you won't see if you didn't know they were there sometimes because they're hidden menus and stuff. The combining and any filters on the volunteer search, a new specific active volunteers section in the reporting area, the volunteer action log. I'm looking for some feedback about that screen as well. And also this idea of printing ops to PDF, which a particular customer asked for. So it was slotted in between releases, where so people would not have noticed that was there. So I'm going to swap screens a section a minute, just so I can show you how the waiting list works. So just bear with me when I get the right screen up. Okay, so can you see the opportunity screen now? Yep, good. So the waiting list functionality is on or off globally at present. You can't switch it on and off for individual opportunities. It's either on or off. What would happen previously is when you have sessions that were full, the desktop version and the mobile version wouldn't even display those sessions. They wouldn't appear for people. They wouldn't even know they existed. So what the screen does now is it actually shows them the session, what time it's on, that sort of stuff, but it also gives them this little prompt here and a little explanation of what's going to happen. So for the volunteers, it's a simple case of clicking the waiting list. They get a notification to say they're on the waiting list. And then in the admin screen, to save me sharing a new screen, I will just use this one. As an admin on the admin side, you get to see the people who are in the waiting list, and it tells you how many sessions they're currently waiting for, because they can join the waiting list with as many sessions as they like on a particular opportunity. So you get information there about how busy it is, how many people are looking for the opportunity, how popular it might be. And then what happens is if any of the actions which create more space on a session, if a volunteer leaves, if admin removes a volunteer, or if we change the maximum number of volunteers that are available on a session, all those actions create an email to the volunteer. If I just switch this to mail emitter. You get these sorts of emails. This just tells me that a slot has become available and how to log in to see that opportunity and join the session you want. What we've decided to do as a sort of compromise with emails is we didn't want to bombard the volunteer with emails all the time, because sometimes, especially for very busy event type opportunities, which is probably where this is going to be used the most, there's a lot of action going on. There's a lot of sessions being made and removed and added, and people being moved around and all that sort of stuff. And we didn't want to keep bombarding the volunteer with emails about the session. But we also didn't want to email them just once, as that probably wouldn't be the expected behavior either. So we've come to a sort of compromise where we record that they've been emailed, that there's a slot that become available, and then there's a time period, which currently is set to an hour. Let's check that, but we're still finessing that sort of time period. So if a slot becomes available within that period, they won't be emailed again. Just to try and stop that sort of email bombardment between them getting too many, they're not getting enough. Admins have to remember to switch action emails on and off, these sorts of things. So hopefully that'll be the right balance between people forgetting to go to the site and join the extra session, but not being told too much about it. Have you got any questions about that? Oh, I think they've been handled okay. We can always come back to it at the end. If we go back to the admin page.
One quick question, Rolf. Is the waiting list available on the volunteer center option? And I've said, yes, it's available in Super admin pages. And if you want to know how to do it, pop us a support ticket in your product, and we'll send you, Steve will send you a short video showing you how to enable that feature.
Yeah, it's in the options section for opportunities. Use a volunteer waiting list. So that's the Super admin menu, top right, options, and then in the opportunities section, you've got a simple yes or no filter there. The next thing I wanted to talk about were the filtering options for volunteers and opportunities. These get added quite quickly sometimes as people come to us with good ideas, and we don't always communicate very well, or they don't turn up in the release notes for particular versions because they happened in between or quite quickly, or someone needed them very quickly. And also the bulk actions, which tend to get this hidden because you don't see it on the screen all the time. So it's always worth checking these out periodically to see if what you wanted to do before and couldn't is now possible. And I also wanted to mention that the type filter has quite a few sub options inside it as well. And very often things get added in here where we're looking for a certain type of volunteer. So rather than add them all just as individual ones, they're sort of grouped here. It's the only one that is grouped. So it's a bit peculiar, but it helps tidy things away that are all related to the sort of volunteer it is. So we've got all sorts of things here, like photos opted in and out for bulk emails. We've added this part at the bottom about have a reference or has no references, and also whether they've been a successful role applicant. That's a fairly new thing. So keep an eye, especially on that type one that often gets extra love in between versions that people don't get communicated to properly. We've also added the ability to look for checkboxes as custom fields in the last version, which is quite a big thing. If you use custom registration fields and you've got a checkbox, previously it wasn't really possible to check for them because of the way checkboxes work on a web page. If they're not checked, you don't get any information. So it's like a sort of null result, and you only get data if they've actually checked the box. But we've got it sorted out now, so you can check for whether you can search for whether they've been checked, and also that they've not checked them. So we can search for that null result as well. All your custom fields are right at the bottom here. In terms of the bulk actions, we've got a few extra ones in here that since the last version. So we've got this link to provider option, which enables you to expose the volunteer details to a provider in just the same way as if they joined an opportunity for that provider. So it's another way that the volunteer become linked to a provider. So you need to be careful with that, because if you link a volunteer to a provider, say that provider will be able to see their details. They can't edit them still, but they'll be able to see their details as if they were on an opportunity with them. And also the book meeting option, which ties into their profile. You can see all the meetings on their profile. There's also a separate menu entry for all bookings, but it means you can book in a whole bunch of people. So you could theoretically filter by a group, find all the volunteers in a certain group who registered between a certain period, and set them all up for a meeting as new volunteers or something of that nature. It's the same for the opportunity screen. We've got a very similar sort of interface. Here we've got some other new ones at the bottom here. Ops with pending applications was added recently to go with the volunteer search for applications to opportunities. And here you can look whether there's pending or no pending applications, which is a quick way to find out those opportunities that may be languishing in terms of the provided response for the volunteer applications, which previously was quite a long, laborious job, because you have to filter by whether they apply opportunities, and you have to click into each opportunity to find out if these applicants have been processed or not. We've also got a couple of new bulk actions here. So email providers is a quick way to email a whole bunch of providers for a whole bunch of opportunities. It means you don't need to know who the provider is for opportunity. You can just select the opportunities you want to email, and you can email the provider straight away from there. And also this print option, which will print multiple opportunities as a PDF. You get a few options about what to include in the PDF, whether you want the details, start, end dates, maps, that sort of stuff. And when you print this, you'll be able to see it on the share screen, because it will open a new window. But that will open up a new window. Share this tab instead, where you get a PDF, and each page is a separate opportunity with a QR code to find the opportunity from someone's phone. And I selected to show the map, so you can see that stuff there. Really useful for volunteer centres and people that want to include other non-digitally enabled people, or just into community spots and notice boards and sorts of things. Super useful. Back to this tab. We often get a lot of questions about activity. What is an active volunteer? What is an inactive volunteer? What does activity mean? Our normal or default active definition is a volunteer that has either joined a session within a time period, or has logged some hours on a flexible opportunity between that period. And we consider those to be active. Our reporting page suffered a little from having those two categories mixed together, because sometimes for some reports and some data, it wasn't possible to have an active period or filter volunteers by activity, and they were a little bit mixed together, and that caused some confusion. So now on the reporting page, we've got two tabs, one for active and one for registered. So any date splits you use in these boxes, and then look at the active volunteer page, that this is looking at these two dates and only pulling up volunteers that are active between those two dates. And then we've got another tab for registered volunteers. And now you know that all this data refers to volunteers that have registered between those two dates. So that should hopefully make this data a lot easier to consume, a lot easier to work out whether it's active or not. The last little section I wanted to go on is the volunteers action log. I have added a few things to this since it was released, and a few different sorts of actions in there. Let's get everybody. Looks now, so they should have some things on here. So this is not a full log. It doesn't record everything yet. Obviously, there's data issues with that sort of stuff. but it does record a lot of the important actions that a volunteer undertakes on the system. So it tells you here what the user was that performed the action. So sometimes this is the admin doing things for the volunteer. It tells you when they look for an opportunity. It tells you when they leave opportunities, when they join sessions, when they leave sessions, when they log hours, all this sort of stuff. It also gives you an idea of what platform they were using and also the date. It's very, very good for looking up things where a volunteer is saying one thing and a provider is saying another, or people don't understand why they are or are not on an opportunity or a session. You can have a quick look in the log at the sort of dates they thought that it happened. And sometimes you find that they've joined and left immediately, or that the provider's left them off. I think it could be more useful, but I don't know the sorts of things that people want to know. So I'm hoping in the Q&A at the end, you can have a little think during the rest of this little chat, and maybe come up with suggestions of whether it's worthwhile extending that to providers, and also an admin log, which would be available to the super admins, but would tell you what your admins have been up to as well. Oh, that makes it sound quite sinister. I didn't mean it to sound sinister.
I've got a very quick question on that one, Rolf. Can those actions be filtered search rather than scroll through the long list? Or could specific actions be reported upon?
Okay, in the first instance, yeah, definitely I can add that as that normal sort of filtered orderable table. I just didn't get around to it. The second question, we've not really thought about, it's still sort of new, still nascent, I suppose. We could technically give a list of the potential actions and ask you which ones you wanted to record. But I think it would probably just add complexity that's maybe not required, because you can always ignore the stuff you're not interested in, unless there's a specific reason that you don't want to collect that information, which I'd be interested to hear. Any sort of GDPR concerns or concerns you might have about privacy or anything. But there's no real gain to not recording the information if it's useful to someone, and it would add that layer of complexity when we're trying to work out whether we should record that action or not.
I think they were talking more about reporting rather than recording. And then Ellen said, can you see the date when people have added hours, not the date they put in for adding the hours?
On the main report page, in terms of whether a volunteer is active or not, that's always the date they put in for the hours. So in a flexible opportunity, that there's a date box to put in, this is when I did the hours. But then, of course, there's also a date recorded for when they entered those hours. I don't think we expose that date anywhere that I can think of on the top of my head, the date at which they performed the action. It would get recorded in this log that I just showed you, and that date there would be the date that the action was performed. So that would be the date they recorded the hours. I'm not sure if you are referring to reports or.
No, Alex gives a thumbs up on that. He seems happy with that. And there was one question from a little bit earlier on the filters, which is really to do with search results, I think, to be changed. The under 16 search results shows opportunity for 16-year-olds. There are hundreds, which is no use for 14 to 15-year-olds. So
this is opportunities.
Yes.
Oh, this is on the actual desktop page.
Right.
Is it for the admins or for the volunteers?
Maybe if the guys from volunteers, let's go because there are some audio issues. Maybe if they join us at the clinic at the end of the day, we can get into that one a little bit with them.
Yeah, there are some options about which age groups we support. So in the options, I'm saying that now, and it might not be an exposed feature, but there are options in the system for having different age groups. So you've got like a 10 to 13, a 13, and they appear on the search page when they're enabled. So you have under 16s, 10 to 13, I think it was, and 13 to 16, something of that nature. And then those options are on the advanced search and search page. So those 13-year-olds can search for suitable just for them. So I think we can tick that box.
For anybody who does have specific questions about their particular issues, Rolf is going to be running a clinic at the end of the day in the final session, which is a drop-in for people to come and have a chat about, their own particular challenges they're facing and some of the questions they have. So we'll crack on with the new stuff if that's okay, and I'll let Rolf go on to the next.
Yeah, that's it for the new stuff, or at least not the existing newish stuff. So the next thing I was going to talk about is some of the integrations that are coming along and bubbling away. Some are finished, some are almost finished, and some you're going to hear about today in a wider or in a more specific sense. So one of the things that is wildly underused is the API and the widgets. The API is technical, as in you will need someone who understands middleware and writing APIs, not writing APIs, but consuming APIs in order to get any benefit out of it. But it's a really good way to connect systems together. It's not as easy as something like Zapier, which we're looking to get involved with more. But it's great for pulling out opportunities and reports and hours and volunteers and finding out when people have changed and data has changed and stuff. So if anyone thinks they've got that expertise available or is interested in looking for that expertise, we'd love the API to be used a bit more and find some good use cases for it. And it helps us develop the API because it's become a little bit stagnant because people aren't using it very much. And so the endpoints and the things you can do with it have sort of just got stuck in the mud a little. So if you're interested in that, get in touch at the end of the day or email me another time. The other thing, which is a lot less technical, is the widget, which I don't know whether people get scared because it looks odd. The code there, you've got to cut and paste. But if you have a WordPress blog or your own website, or you share a website with someone else, anywhere where HTML is being used, you can embed this script. And it's as simple as copying this bit of code, which is from the super admin menu setup and the API and widgets section. You just cut and paste this little bit of script and put it in there. It will reveal a search bar for your users wherever you insert that script. And with it, they can search for opportunities. It comes up the results again in your own website there. And then once they click on more details, it will take them from your website to your TeamKinetic application and show them the full details about the opportunity. The only technical aspect of this script is this section called container, TK widget, sorry. That refers to the space in the website that you want the widget to appear. So that TK widget, that's the default, and that means you have to have a container with that ID. If you can get that sorted, everything else just happens on its own. There's nothing for you to do. It's super easy. So it would be great to see people using that a bit more. We've just recently finished with Newham integrating tempo time credits. I don't know how many people are familiar with tempo time credits. They're not everywhere in Britain at the minute. They're concentrated in certain areas, but it's a mechanism by which you can, as an organization, you can purchase the system and credits from Tempo, and they go out and organize the redemptions for those tokens, and then you can offer them to your volunteers. So they've got a really great website with all the things you can exchange your tokens for in the area, and they vary all over the place. There's bits and bobs for everybody. And what we've done is incorporate that into TeamKinetic. So from within the normal sort of admin screens, you can select an opportunity that is eligible for tempo time credits. You can dictate how many hours a volunteer can exchange for tempo time credits. So say their first 2 hours, their first 3, 4, 5, whatever it is. And also integrated the experience for the volunteers. So the volunteers can go to their credits section in the dashboard that you see here. They can register with Tempo if they're not already. And if they are already registered, it will pull in their current balance and also give a brief summary of what the most popular exchanges are at that point. And they can jump out to Tempo to process and claim their credits. It's a really nice, simple way. It's not free, as I mentioned. Chris has the details about cost and stuff. You can speak to him about it later on. But it's a really great way to recognize and reward your volunteers. And they're real world rewards. And it's really reduces the admin for you guys of having to find suitable rewards. They self-service, they're popular things, and someone else is doing the work of connecting it together for you. It's not something we can just switch on and off because you need to have a Tempo time credit, Tempo account, and there's some setup things for that. So you won't see it in the dashboard as just an on-off. It will be something you'll have to apply for and connect with Chris or whoever your manager is to set that up in conjunction with Tempo. And Chris also knows the areas they're based in and where it's suitable for.
Rolf, just popping my hand up there, if that's okay. Anybody interested in Tempo, Rachel will be joining us in the next breakout session, talking all about Tempo, where they cover, how it works, all that kind of stuff. Rachel's going to she's just there, she's turned her camera on and give everyone a wave. Hi, Rach. She'll be covering all this later on. So anybody that's interested in Tempo and how that may work, please join Rachel's session at the breakout later on.
Okay, they Tempo have quite a lot of reporting and stuff as well, so you can really get a finger on what people are using them for and how much they're using, and you can distribute your credits between your providers. They're called earn groups in Tempo, but they're equivalent to the providers, and you can distribute out your credits across those providers as you see fit, and so you've got a pretty good level of control. It won't be possible for volunteers to sort of hoard lots and lots of these Tempo credits. The second thing we're close to launching is the digital criminal checks, which is a big milestone, I think. It's still a barrier to a lot of volunteers who volunteer in certain sections of the sector, in that they have to have a criminal check, but it can be quite slow. You have to look at lots of stuff, lots of ID documents. There's a lot of face-to-face stuff going on. They have to travel. There's a lot of barriers to getting that done, and it can really put people off, I imagine. For some reason, I've still got a Tempo point at the bottom of that bullet point. Sorry. So the way this works, there's not much to show because it's that simple, I guess. So we work in conjunction with a company called First Advantage. Similar to Tempo, there's setup work at the start to get going with First Advantage. And there is a cost to each digital check. They can check also for just an ID check or a passport check. But if you went all the way through to checking their ID, then doing the criminal check, I think, Chris, or correct me if I'm wrong, but it's less than £10 per check. I think he's going to come in now. No? £14.50 is not less than £10. It's more than £10. That's an enhanced check. Okay, so that's with the ID, digital ID verification and DBS. So the prices for each bit vary; they go up and down for different things. But it is possible to check for driving licenses, right to work, all these sorts of things, which we will be exposing as we go on. But right now, that it's aimed at people that want to go from zero to a successful criminal check with a minimum of steps. So this happens all on the user's end. So all you need to do in the admin side is select a volunteer and hit a button, and everything else is done for you. We will email the volunteer with the setup steps they need on their phone. They open up a website on their phone. It starts going through the procedure. It will read their passport chip. It'll take a photo of their face, all these sorts of things that you might have encountered already when you've been doing digital verifications. And they'll get all that digital ID stuff sorted out. And then we'll perform a check, the criminal checks that you've requested. This all happens within a sort of 24-hour window. And at numerous steps, we get informed from First Advantage of what's been happening, and we update the volunteer profile and update the admins on that process and what's going on, until eventually we get a result from the criminal check. And if it's successful, it's clear, we can update the volunteer profile for that and put in your default renewal period, which you can set in the options, whether it's a year, 2 years, before you want to consider doing another one. And that's all done. There's no need to meet the person. There's no need to see the documents. There's no need to confirm the documents yourself. So it takes away a lot of that guesswork about what is a valid document, what isn't a valid document, is this them, is this their bill, all that sort of stuff, which can take a lot of time. So it's a super quick way of getting these criminal checks in. It's a slower process to get going with First Advantage. I think it's fair to say than with Tempo, because there's quite a lot of stuff to do and contracts to set up and all this sort of stuff. As you can imagine, it's a more involved process. But once you're up and running, it's as simple as clicking a button to get that digital check underway. It's going to be super useful. The next bit we're going to talk about is where we're headed next.
So some in there very quickly again, just to let people know, if people are interested in First Advantage and setting up that, on their account, then First Advantage are going to be joining us again on the next breakout. If you're interested in both, we'll be recording them all, so don't worry, you get to access the recordings, and you can always just drop me an email, and we can start a conversation directly with you as well.
In terms of the Scottish PVG, they're still behind the times, I believe. I think Chris is best placed to answer this, but I think you could do the simple check, but not whatever the equivalent is, the enhanced is in Scotland. There's no digital version of that yet, is there? Yeah, so the standard checks, but not the PVG, unfortunately. But I'm sure that will change. It's only a matter of time, so when it does. Luke is asking about whether, if they use First Advantage because they're currently getting a new checking system, would they have to have two different systems? I don't think so, as far as I understand it. Your First Advantage can do the lot, it's a broad spectrum thing.
We're doing that with Volunteer Passport, which is an organisation in Northamptonshire, currently, where they already had a First Advantage account, and we're able to fold that account into the TeamKinetic setup. So all the volunteer pathway is in Kinetic, but you have a separate dashboard that's on the same account that you can access, which would be First Advantage for non-volunteers.
Yeah, I forgot to mention that actually. When you are integrated with First Advantage, you can just leave the system to do its own thing. But there's also a big dashboard that First Advantage enable for you. You can go and check things. You can also stimulate checks from there, or start checks from there and check the progress there as well. So this next section is going to be about where we're heading next. So we've got a few things that we're already in the process of moving to, and then a few things that we've alluded to previously that we're just thinking about. So the first thing is this customized onboarding and registration process for both the registrations and for opportunity onboarding. As we've grown over time and incorporated different ideas, we've got quite a few different ways to restrict an opportunity now. Some of them are simple on-offs, some of them require the volunteer to do things. We've got roles, the apply first, and it's become a little bit complicated. Complicated to understand, complicated to check and bug check, and there's an amount of technical depth there. So we want to try and roll all that up into a single sort of process, one for registration and one for opportunity. The idea being that when you create an opportunity, if there is anything that you want the volunteer to be able to match or do or fit before they can join the opportunity, that will then become an applying opportunity. There'll be a process they have to go through first, but that process will be customizable. You'll be able to drag in specific checks like their age, those sorts of things. They need the criminal check, and roll all that up in along with custom questions you might want to ask into a process that volunteer goes through. So everything will be in the one place. And a similar idea for the registration page. So the registration page you will be able to alter the order of the fields. There will be certain mandatory fields that have to be in that form, like the password field, for instance, a classic example. They'll have to be in that form. You won't be able to take them out of the form, but you'll be able to change the order of the form, and also put in your custom questions where you want your custom questions to be rather than all at the end. And also add other steps to that registration process in with a similar interface to the new onboarding for opportunities. So you may have steps like go and read this, go and do this. So there'll be certain steps along the way that we'll be able to monitor and keep a track of whilst they're registering. So instead of just being registered and then you clear or don't clear them, they will register, and then there'll be an onboarding process with steps that you define, and they'll have cleared or not cleared those steps before they're given access to the site. The next thing we are moving on to is the granular permissions. So this is being able to set up users with their own permission set for the site. We don't know exactly how it's going to look and how much of a blur there's going to be between admins and providers. But we're looking for things like, can they create an opportunity? Can they edit an opportunity? Can they update a volunteer's details? Can they access all volunteers' records in the search? These sorts of options we're really interested to hear what other people think about these permissions and the sorts of things you'd like to stop or enable your admins from doing. Because right now, a super admin can do everything, can set up the site in any way they want and all the application options, and all the admins can pretty much do the whole thing outside of that super admin menu. which doesn't give that much flexibility. We'd also like to refine the opportunity creation again. We did some work on this to bring it into this sort of sliding window effect where there were individual steps, so it wasn't as off-putting for people, but there's still continuing issues with the op creation, especially when people do it for the first time, around the dates and the sessions and what these things mean. So we're looking at ways we can refine that, shorten it, make it quicker, make it better, and make it more understandable. As part of that work, it also rolls into this new version we're going to try and work on. So currently we have a free version of TeamKinetic, which is fairly limited. You end up being effectively a provider, but you do get access to opportunity creation, you get access to volunteers, management of login hours and all those sorts of things. But what we'd like to do is roll that into the main product as a community edition. Chris alluded earlier on to the fact that we'd like to support smaller charities that can't afford, smaller organizations and charities that can't afford a full-blown system, but have active volunteers. And we want to always encourage that movement of volunteering. And you being customers helps us to fund that community edition. So we'd also be looking for you to suggest organizations you might know that could benefit from this, from a free version. But the idea is that it's rolled into TeamKinetic as a direct type of TeamKinetic rather than being separate, and making sure we give them enough to make it useful, but we don't parasitize our own business, as it were. And as Chris mentioned earlier on about the AI involvement, do we need it? Do we want it? Where would it be? There's very simple use cases, for instance, rewriting an opportunity description. That would be a simple point to insert AI and also uncontentious. You can use it or not, and it can take that text and rewrite it and make it better or worse, depending on your point of view. But there's also other areas where we could insert it which are more contentious, like behavioral analysis. What are volunteers doing? Where are they going? What ops are they choosing? Which sessions are they choosing? Why are they choosing it? I don't think we as an organization would be able to use it for that, because I don't think our data pool is large enough. I don't think we'd get very decent sort of results out of it. But they're things we're looking at. We've also looked at this sentiment analysis for other projects we've been involved in, which, as Chris mentioned, is another form of AI, another form of deep learning, basically. So it takes any sort of phrase, sentence, anything that someone said, and gives you an idea of each of the sentences' sentiment within that paragraph. It does it by comparing it to millions of other texts that it's read, and working out what words are likely to come in what order for certain sentiments. And so it can give us a good, clear idea of what volunteers are thinking and feeling about an opportunity or the experience they've had, without you having to read through the text and interpret it yourself. It's pretty good. It falls over with very specific cases like sarcasm, it's not so good with, or colloquialisms, it's not so good with, but certain things it picks up pretty well. Like one example of things when people say something's bad and they mean it's good, or these sorts of things. If it's a culturally significant mutation of the language, it tends to understand it. But yeah, some of the more sort of Yorkshire type colloquialisms we tested it on, it didn't know what people were talking about. So that's another thing that we think would be useful. Again, we don't think it would be very contentious to insert some sort of sentiment analysis when we're looking at the feedback from volunteers.
Question, Rolf, from Anne Kemp, around the use of ChatGPT. If we were to use something like that for rewriting opportunity data, where would they stand in terms of copyright? I don't know if we have an answer to that. It's a good question.
As I mentioned before during Rob's chat, I know that Microsoft recently indemnified their Bard software against intellectual property and copyright issues, and said that they would handle any sort of legal repercussions of using Bard, which takes the onus away from the user and puts it on the creator. I mean, I don't know. It was in a press release that Microsoft released. I don't know if they're being held to it, or there's no legal framework for this yet. But that might be where it goes. You've also got things like some of the large photo and image banks have also been training their own IAs just on material which is licensed. I think that obviously the industry is aware of these issues and are starting to focus down on licensing and what things they can and can't read. So I don't know, but I imagine it's hard to imagine that if you admitted or certified that this piece of work has been written with the help of artificial intelligence, ChatGPT, Bard, whatever it was, I find it hard that then you could be blamed for what Bard did with it. I think that's probably where it's going to go, not least because it's easier to sue Microsoft than it is to sue 4 million users of Bard. But yeah, who knows?
Another question, Rolf. I'll let you read it if you want.
Is this from Amina? How would sentiment analysis reflect linked volunteer motivations? How do you record? Well, currently we only record what we call feedback on their opportunities. So and this is usually only emotionally charged feedback. Generally, people only leave feedback if they've had a great time or if they've had a terrible time. People don't tend to just leave the more sort of, it was all right type feedback. So it is quite emotionally charged. So it probably wouldn't be reflective of the motivations and feelings for all your volunteers. I was really thinking of it just as a analysis tool at this point, letting you know, on average, is the volunteer sentiment going up? Is it going down? Is it becoming more positive, less positive? Those sorts of things. But yeah, extracting those bits of data about why a volunteer wants to volunteer and what their motivations are. Sentiment analysis couldn't do that because it's far too basic an approach. It is really literally just pulling out whether these sentences are arranged in a positive or a negative way. The words are arranged in positive, negative ways. So you'd need a different model for that sort of stuff, which I presume the current AIs could do something with. But yeah, that's not how I imagine we would use it as a first step. Anything else? App costs. Okay, Natalie, for the we have tiers of usage. So we do have a free one right now that you can use right now, which means you can generate opportunities and a pool of volunteers can see them and you can log hours and those the basic sort of tasks. The cheapest version of the full TeamKinetic system is £19 a month. And then it goes up to the enterprise versions, which can be anything depending on what sort of integrations there are, but average around the sort of £99 a month, give or take some stuff. There's no cost to the volunteers for using the app. We will only be providing, as far as I understand, we will only be providing the white label version of the app to enterprise customers. Is that right? Or at least to start with?
To start with,
yeah.
Yeah.
But there's definitely no cost for the volunteers.
Okay, well, I know we're rapidly coming up towards the end of the session. And as I mentioned, we've got a couple of breakouts after lunch where First Advantage, we're talking a lot more about what First Advantage do. And Tempo, we're talking a lot more about what Tempo do. And we'll also have Steve run a session for those guys that are TeamKinetic customers on how to really get the most out of your system and the things that you can do that really make a difference, we think, to volunteers. And at the end of the day, if the last session of the day, I should say, Rolf will be running a clinic for anybody that does have questions that are specific to their particular use of the application. So there's more opportunities to speak to us. Steve will certainly have Q&A at the end of his session as well, as will the guys from First Advantage and Tempo. Is anybody got any other questions about some of the developments you've heard about here today? I think it's also worth me mentioning that as a organization, we as we mentioned at the start, we're sort of proudly committed to seeing the sector improve. And one of the pieces of work we're involved with at the minute is looking at how we can develop an open standard for a volunteer opportunity. And we're talking to an open data standard organization based out in America, looking at how volunteer opportunities can be involved in the open standard so that you could use a system like TeamKinetic alongside a system like Do It, alongside a system like WCVA's volunteerinwales.net, Volunteer Scotland, where opportunity data is no longer stuck inside a single silo, but can be more easily shared with different platforms and make it easier for volunteers and volunteer organizations to move around and change products as they see fit. So there is a lot of work that we're doing around, should we say, interoperability across the sector that isn't necessarily technical, as Rolf been talking about today, but more policy and procedural and advocating on what we think is a better direction digitally for the sector. And that also coincides with the work we're doing with Gethin, who's going to be talking as well this afternoon about our sponsored work with the Association of Volunteer Managers about developing a really useful resource for all our customers and really the sector as a whole around digital volunteer management and some of the pitfalls you might want to be aware of, some of the benefits you might not be accessing. That's going to be a really useful resource that we'll be working with the sector hand in hand over the next 12 months to develop and release.